She thought leaving would erase every memory they had built together. He believed waiting would someday bring her back. They both survived the freezing winters of Norway. They survived the endless nights, the lonely roads, and the distance that stretched between two hearts. But there was one thing neither of them could survive: the silence. Silence slowly stole the words they never said, the promises they never kept, and the love they were too afraid to fight for. If you have ever loved someone you could never truly forget, then this story is for you. It begins on a cold autumn morning in a small Norwegian village surrounded by quiet mountains, deep blue fjords, and endless pine forests where every breath carried the scent of rain and snow. Ethan stood alone beside an old wooden dock, watching gentle waves touch the shore. Years had passed since the day Emma walked away without looking back, yet every sunrise reminded him of the girl who had once promised that no matter where life took them, they would always find their way home. He still remembered the warmth of her smile, the sound of her laughter echoing through the forest, and the way she looked at him as if he were the safest place in the world. But life has a strange way of changing people. Dreams became responsibilities. Distance became routine. Phone calls became shorter. Messages became fewer. One quiet goodbye slowly turned into years of complete silence. Ethan often asked himself the same question every morning. Did she stop loving him, or did life simply become too heavy for love to survive? No answer ever came. The village continued moving forward while he remained trapped inside memories that refused to fade. Every familiar street reminded him of the days they spent walking together through narrow paths covered with fallen leaves. Every snowfall reminded him of the promise they had whispered beside a frozen lake. She had smiled and said, "No matter how far we go, our hearts will always know the way back." At the time, he believed those words forever. Now they sounded like echoes carried away by the cold northern wind. Friends told him to move on. Family said time heals everything. But some hearts do not heal because time passes. They heal only when they finally understand why they were broken. Ethan didn't know it yet, but the journey waiting ahead would not be about finding Emma again. It would become a journey toward discovering the man he had forgotten while searching for the woman he could never let go. And somewhere beyond the quiet forests, hidden among the winding roads of Norway, destiny was already preparing a moment neither of them expected. Before this story begins, subscribe now, because some love stories are not just about finding someone else. They're about finding yourself. And this is one of those stories. The next morning, Ethan left the village before sunrise. The cold air filled his lungs as he drove along the winding roads that stretched beside Norway's quiet fjords. The world around him looked almost unchanged, yet everything inside him felt different. He was no longer chasing a memory. He was chasing an answer that had lived inside his heart for years. Every mile reminded him of another piece of the life they had once shared. There was the small wooden bridge where Emma had laughed as the rain soaked their jackets. There was the quiet cafe where they had planned a future filled with simple dreams. There was the hill where they watched the first snow of winter fall together, believing nothing could ever separate them. Back then, forever had sounded so easy. Now it felt like the hardest word in the world. Ethan stopped beside a peaceful lake surrounded by tall pine trees. The water reflected the grey sky like a mirror, calm on the surface but hiding an unknown depth beneath. He sat alone on a weathered bench and opened the old notebook he had carried for years. Inside were unfinished letters he had written to Emma but had never sent. Some pages held apologies, others held questions that no one could answer. One sentence appeared again and again in different handwriting, written during different years. "If I had spoken sooner, would you have stayed?" He stared at those words for a long time before quietly closing the notebook. For the first time, he realized he had spent years blaming fate while never forgiving himself. Love had not disappeared in a single day. It had slowly faded beneath fear, pride, and the silence neither of them knew how to break. As the wind moved gently through the trees, Ethan noticed an elderly fisherman standing nearby, repairing an old wooden boat. The man smiled without asking any questions, as though he already understood why strangers often came to this lonely place. "Sometimes," the old man said softly, "people think they are searching for someone they lost. But after a long journey, they discover they were searching for the person they used to be." Those words settled deep inside Ethan's heart. He thanked the fisherman and continued his journey, carrying something far more valuable than hope. He carried understanding. As evening approached, the mountains were covered in soft mist, and the first lights began glowing from distant wooden cabins. Ethan parked his car beside a narrow forest trail he and Emma had once explored together. He had no idea whether she had ever returned to this place. He only knew that every important chapter of his life had somehow begun here. Taking a slow breath, he stepped onto the quiet path. The forest welcomed him with nothing but the sound of leaves moving gently in the wind. Somewhere, ahead, hidden beyond the trees, destiny was waiting once again. Whether it would bring heartbreak or healing, Ethan was finally ready to face it. The forest was quieter than Ethan remembered. Every step along the narrow trail carried memories he had spent, years trying to outrun. The old wooden cabins still stood between the towering pine trees, and the cold breeze carried the familiar scent of earth and rain. Time had changed the seasons, but it had not erased the places where their story had begun. Ethan reached the small clearing where they had once carved their initials into the trunk of an old pine tree. The marks had faded, almost disappearing beneath the growing bark, just as life had tried to bury the memories inside his heart. He gently touched the rough wood and smiled for the first time in years, not because the pain had vanished, but because he finally understood that love had never been meant to imprison him. It had been meant to change him. As he turned to leave, he noticed someone standing at the edge of the clearing. A woman wearing a long dark coat looked toward the valley below. Her hair moved softly with the wind. For a single heartbeat, the world stood still. Ethan knew that silhouette before she even turned around. Emma slowly faced him. Neither of them spoke. They simply looked at each other, separated by only a few steps and by years of silence. Tears filled Emma's eyes before she whispered, "You came back." Ethan smiled gently, his voice calm and certain. "I will always come back. That is my promise." Emma lowered her eyes, struggling to hold back the emotions she had hidden for so long. "I thought leaving would help us both. I thought if I walked away, you would forget me and find a happier life." Ethan shook his head. "For years, I believed I was searching for you, but somewhere along this journey, I realized I wasn't looking for the woman who left. I was looking for the man I had become when I loved you. You helped me become someone brave enough to love without fear, and I lost that man when I lost you." Emma stepped closer, tears falling freely now. "I never stopped loving you. I only stopped believing I deserved to be loved." Ethan reached out and gently held her hands, not to keep her from leaving, but to let her know she was free to stay. The silence between them no longer felt empty. It felt peaceful, filled with everything their hearts had been trying to say for years. Sometimes love does not need perfect timing. Sometimes it simply needs two people willing to return with wiser hearts. Together, they walked toward the edge of the cliff, overlooking the quiet fjord as the evening sky glowed with soft, natural colors. No promises of forever were spoken, because they had learned that real love is not proven by beautiful words, but by the courage to return, forgive, and begin again. Some love stories do not end when someone walks away. They begin again when two hearts find the courage to come home. If you believe in second chances, leave a like and subscribe for the next chapter, The Reunion.